At 2 a.m. GMT, welcome to the newsroom with me, Janat Jalil. California introduces a nighttime curfew as coronavirus cases surge past 12 million across the U.S.
This is hard because here we are at Thanksgiving and Christmas. We're sick of being scared and isolated, and we are tempted dearly to gather.
Thousands protest in France over a draft law that would ban publishing some images of the police.
It's a serious attack against the right to demonstrate. It's a serious attack against freedom to inform.
Nearly 2,000 years after they died in a volcanic eruption in Italy, the bodies of two men are unearthed near Pompeii.
One of the men is in what we call a pugilistic pose, and this is characteristic of people who have died in conditions of intense heat.
And why mistletoe sellers are having to kiss goodbye to their traditional Christmas sales. That's here on the BBC World Service after this bulletin.
This is the BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. A judge in Pennsylvania has thrown out an attempt by Donald Trump's campaign to block the state's certification of its election result. In what's been described as a scathing opinion, Judge Matthew Brann rejected the lawsuit, which called for millions of postal votes to be discarded as entirely without merit. It's a further blow to the Trump campaign's legal challenges to Joe Biden's victory in the presidential election. David Willis has more.
Judge Matthew Brann said the lawsuit brought by Donald Trump's personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani contained speculative accusations that were unsupported by evidence. His verdict clears the way for Pennsylvania officials to certify the election result there in the next few days. Mr. Trump's Democratic rival Joe Biden won the state by more than 80,000 votes. Another key swing state, Michigan, is also due to certify its election result on Monday.
The United States has now exceeded 12 million cases of the coronavirus since the pandemic began. The world's worst affected country is experiencing a surge in the virus, setting daily records for new infections. Deaths and hospital admissions are also reaching levels not seen for several months. California is introducing an overnight curfew today. President Trump is reported to have missed a session at the G20 summit on pandemic preparedness and was pictured a short time later on his golf course. The coronavirus dominated the meeting, which was held online, hosted by Saudi Arabia. Hundreds of anti-government protesters in Guatemala have vandalised and set fire to parts of the Congress building before being dispersed by riot police. Elsewhere in the capital, Guatemala City, thousands of people took part in largely peaceful demonstrations against the new budget. Our America's editor Leonardo Rocha reports.
Some areas of the building were completely destroyed and important documents were burned by the fire. Several people were treated for the effects of smoke inhalation. The violence marred an otherwise peaceful day of protests against the new controversial budget, which was approved by the Guatemalan Congress on Wednesday. The opposition accuses President Alejandro Yamatei of allocating too much money for big infrastructure projects, which they say will be awarded to well-connected private companies. They want more resources to be put on social projects in Guatemala's public health system, currently struggling to cope with the coronavirus pandemic.
The burial has taken place of a black man who was brutally killed by two white security guards in southern Brazil earlier this week. João Alberto Silveira Freitas, a 40-year-old welder and community leader, was severely beaten by security guards at Carrefour supermarket in the city of Porto Alegre. You're listening to the World News from the BBC. The Portuguese government has announced new restrictions to slow the spread of coronavirus shortly after Parliament approved a 2-week extension of the country's state of emergency. Prime Minister António Costa described the situation as extremely worrying and said he could not allow the health service to be overwhelmed. He outlined new tiered restrictions, including extending the current nightly curfew to weekend afternoons. Pope Francis has urged young entrepreneurs and economists to take up the challenge of creating a new, more just economic model that protects the planet while also helping the poor and dispossessed. In a video addressed to more than 2,000 young Roman Catholics from around the world, the pontiff told them they were called upon to make an impact in their communities.
History teaches us that there are no systems or crises able to completely cancel the capacity, ingenuity and creativity that God stirs in our hearts. With dedication and fidelity to your people, to your present and your future, you can join others in weaving a new way of making history. Don't be afraid to get involved and to touch the soul of the cities with the gaze of Jesus.
The North African wing of Al-Qaeda, Akim, has named a new leader following the killing in June of its previous head, Abdelmalek Drukdel, in a French military operation in Mali. An audio message published online by the group named the Algerian militant Abu Ubaidah Yusuf al-Anabi as his successor. Akim is the strongest of several jihadist factions operating from Mauritania to Chad, fueling the insurgency across the Sahel region. The world's top two men's tennis players have been knocked out of the ATP finals in London. Daniil Medvedev beat Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic was defeated by Dominic Thiem at the O2 Arena. It was Medvedev's first win over Rafael Nadal. BBC News.
Welcome to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Jeanette Jalil. Already the worst hit country, the US is seeing coronavirus cases soar. A week ago, it had recorded 11 million infections. In a matter of days, that's increased to 12 million. California alone has 1 million cases. It's now brought in a nighttime curfew. This comes as Americans are preparing for Thanksgiving, traditionally the busiest week for travel. And public health experts like Dr. George Trimble says people may struggle to socially distance.
This is hard because here we are at Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's a time when we're at the end of our alarm fatigue. We're sick of being scared and isolated, and we are tempted dearly to gather.
Let's speak now to our correspondent in Los Angeles, David Willis. And David, tell us more about this curfew in California.
Well, the California Governor, Gavin Newsom, has imposed an overnight curfew, Jeanette, which will come into force in a few hours' time throughout most of the state and affect around 37 million people. It's due to start at 10 p.m. tonight and last until 5 o'clock in the morning. And the order prohibits most non-essential activity outside the home during those hours, including gatherings with members of other households. And the intention is to curb late-night drinking and group activities, group gatherings particularly. And the curfew is initially slated to remain in place for the next month, although it could be extended. But the responsibility for enforcing it rests with local officials, and some have already said that they do not care to enforce it.
And it's not just California that's been badly hit. There have been record levels of infections nationwide. We're approaching 200,000 each day. The US is coming up to Thanksgiving. What are other states doing?
Well, that's right. We're seeing a surge in new cases of the coronavirus here. For the first time, the daily death toll has passed 2,000 people, and health officials are warning that the new wave of inspections could soon overwhelm the healthcare system here. There are fears that holiday travels might make things worse as well. All that's prompted many states and major cities to impose near lockdowns or other restrictions, or simply advise people to stay at home for Thanksgiving, which of course is typically the busiest travel day of the year here in the United States.
And while these cases are surging, as you say, 2,000 deaths daily, Donald Trump is still trying to contest the result of the US election, but he's had yet another setback.
He is indeed, and he's suffered another legal blow a short while ago when a judge in Pennsylvania dismissed a lawsuit brought by Mr. Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, a lawsuit that sought to block certification of the election result there in Pennsylvania. The Trump campaign had called for millions of postal votes to be discarded, but the judge, Matthew Braun, said that the lawsuit contained speculative accusations, as he put it, that were unsupported unsupported by the evidence. Now, his verdict clears the way for officials in Pennsylvania to certify the election result there in the next few days. And Joe Biden won that state by more than 80,000 votes. Another key swing state, Michigan, is also due to certify its election result on Monday. So it does appear that the president is running out of options when it comes to getting the results of this election overturned.
David, thank you. David Willis there. So Donald Trump not getting very far in the courts, but what impact is his refusal to concede having on his supporters? Our North America correspondent Aleem Makboul has travelled to the Trump heartlands of rural Florida and Georgia to find out.
Veterans for Trump and America. It's not over. It's not over.
Beside a highway in Okaloosa County in northwestern Florida, the faithful wave Trump flags and hold placards.
We will accept what President Trump feels is lawfully correct.
For you, it's about when Donald Trump concedes.
Because he has inside knowledge that a lot of just normal lay people wouldn't have. His tweets are always factual. He doesn't just make something up.
There are plenty of people who would say they're not always factual, his tweets, and he does make stuff up.
That's not true.
What has been the reaction when you come out here?
I just get goosebumps of pride of being an American.
You just got a little bit emotional there.
Yeah. I just love America so much. You know, I'm a veteran, a small business owner, a Christian, and I just want America to be legitimate. I don't want corruption to take over.
Go almost anywhere in the rural South, in the bars and restaurants, very few of which are closed in the pandemic, and you hear the conspiracy theories repeated.
I think a majority of it's a lie because ballots were brought in unnoticed in the back rooms, through the back doors. People that have died years ago are still voting.
In America, in the divided states of America.
Through his music, Jim White has chronicled the story of the South. We find him looking for second-hand instruments at a market in a corner of rural Georgia, concerned about what the future will bring here.
We're here at this flea market. It's predominantly Trump-supporting people. They're good people, but they have been kind of huddled into this corner, and there's no way out of it other than walking through the paint that Trump laid down. So,
and where does that lead?
Well, I'm afraid it leads to civil war. It's happening. It is a virtual civil war. People are turning against each other, you know, brother against brother. I talk to people who go to family reunions. They can't talk to half of their family. They can't talk to them. They stop going to family reunions because they could not bear to be around such hateful rhetoric.
Rumors, but sometimes I get a little concerned.
Jim White's anxious that when such division remains, physical violence is all the more likely. But he feels a contentious election has only exacerbated the splits.
That report by Aleem Makboul. You're listening to the BBC World Service. Fiona has the headlines.
A lawsuit brought by the Trump campaign aiming to block the certification of Pennsylvania's election results has been scathingly dismissed by a federal judge. With the number of people who have had the coronavirus in the United States now exceeding 12 million, California has imposed an overnight curfew starting in 4 hours' time. And riot police in Guatemala have dispersed anti-government protesters who set fire to parts of the Congress building.
Let's turn now to France, where thousands of people have been protesting against plans to make filming or photographing the police a criminal offence in some circumstances. That was a rally in Paris. There are also marches in Lille, Marseille and other major cities. The proposed law would make it illegal to circulate an image of a police officer's face with the intention to cause them harm. But journalists say it will damage press freedom. Well, I'm joined now by our reporter Charlotte Gallagher. So Charlotte, why are the protesters so alarmed by this draft law?
Well, as you mentioned there, Jeanette, there's concerns about press freedom and how these laws would be interpreted by the courts in France. So, for example, if you're a journalist covering a large protest and there are police there and they're in photographs, if they're in films, could you be prosecuted for that? And protesters out today were also concerned about police brutality. They say by filming things at protests, they discourage some police from potentially abusing people in the crowd and also catch offences. And there's actually a case in France at the moment. 3 police officers are being prosecuted for manslaughter over the death of a man in Paris. And all this was caught on film by bystanders. And these videos are now being used as evidence by the court. So there is a case of these videos being really key evidence in some cases. President Emmanuel Macron, he's also being accused of hypocrisy over this law. After the Islamist attacks in France recently, he spent a lot of time talking about the importance of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And people against this new law, they say that things like that would be deliberately affected by it. Now, Philippe Vervaeke is a human rights campaigner and was protesting in Lille.
It's a serious attack against the right to demonstrate. It's a serious attack against freedom to inform. And I'm even more outraged that 2 weeks ago the president forcefully defended freedom of expression, only to come and trample it under his feet barely 15 days later. It's complete hypocrisy.
So some serious concerns there. What's the government's response been?
Well, the government says this is not about press freedom, that press freedom will still be protected. But they're saying it's about protecting police officers from acts of violence. They say they have been injured at protests and it's become very worrying for police officers. Now, they're saying this law would focus on things like social media campaigns that are identifying particular police officers and revealing perhaps where they live or where they work and trying to protect them from harm. Now, we think the government was spurred into action because last month a police station on the outskirts of Paris was attacked by a large crowd armed with fireworks and iron bars. And that was a real moment of concern for authorities in France, and they want to prevent any violence escalating.
Yeah, we know that police officers have also died in Islamist attacks. Charlotte, thank you very much for that. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of 2 men who died in the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius that destroyed the ancient Roman city of Pompeii nearly 2,000 years ago. It's thought the remains are those of a rich man and his slave. Sophie Hay is an archaeologist who studied and excavated extensively at Pompeii.
The scene is from an excavation in a villa that's actually just north of Pompeii. So a suburban villa, and we are standing in an underground room, so the lower levels of this rather fancy villa. And what we can see are 2 people, both identified as men, lying prone on the ground on their backs, perpendicular to each other. One of the men is in what we call a pugilistic pose, and this is characteristic of people who have died in conditions of intense heat. He's in the pose of a boxer in a sort of defensive position. His arms are up as if he's defending himself. But this is just because of the nature of his death in this kind of pyroclastic surge, it's called. So all the hot gases and volcanic material raced down the slopes of Vesuvius, and they were intensely hot. And so it's under these conditions that you get this kind of pugilistic pose, it's called. So one of them, you can actually see in the plaster cast itself, you can see the shape of the folds of a very heavy piece of clothing, which might suggest that this person is a richer person and the other person hasn't got quite as heavy clothing on, so he may be a slave who was just wearing his tunic at that moment.
Archaeologist Sophie Hay. Netflix's The Crown, which portrays the life of the British royal family over a number of decades, is known for causing a stir when each season comes out. But season 4, which covers the late 1970s to 1990, has caused the most headlines yet. And now calls are intensifying for the platform to flag the series as a dramatisation and not historical fact.
Your Majesty. How many times can this family make the same mistake? I am the son of... paying the consequences each time. Of nothing.
What I want is to be loved. It's all any of us want from you.
Well, our reporter Stephanie Prentice joins me in the studio. And Stephanie, which elements are causing the most issues here?
Well, the most headline-grabbing storyline here is the dynamic between Prince Charles, Princess Diana and the then Camilla Parker Bowles, now, of course, the Duchess of Cornwall, particularly in terms of the timeline around all of their interactions. Now, Prince Charles is depicted as conducting an ongoing affair during his marriage, and Diana herself is shown struggling with an eating disorder and displaying erratic behaviour. Now, Earl Spencer, her brother, has said he felt uneasy watching the way his sister is portrayed in the drama and said he fears that viewers will forget it's fiction. Now, the tense dynamic between the Queen and the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, for some of it, who is shown being humiliated during a hunting trip to Balmoral, that's the Scottish home of the royal family, that's also being called into question. Now, the series was created by the British screenwriter Peter Morgan, and royal biographer Penny Junor has been one of the people close to the royals who's criticising his choices this time round.
Morgan was gentler with the first series. With this one, he really is out to do them in. A lot of the things he's made up are just devices, dramatic devices. And these characters, I mean, particularly, Charles and Camilla, who are painted in such a terrible light, are going to be our future king and queen.
Now, the English writer Hugo Vickers is another royal historian that's come out to say, in his words, it's absolutely vital that a disclaimer is shown at the start of each episode, warning viewers that this show is fictionalised. Now, Peter Morgan has defended some fabricated scenes, including one phone call where Prince Charles is urged to marry quickly. He says, sometimes you have to forsake accuracy, but you must never forsake truth. Now, Julian Fellowes, who's the creator of Downton Abbey, he pointedly reminded the Crown's producers that they are portraying the lives of real people. And it is worth noting that when Netflix released figures earlier this year, they said 73 million households worldwide have watched The Crown since it began in 2016. And Claire Irving, she's a royal author based in the US. She also said many Americans regard the events depicted in The Crown as gospel truth.
Stephanie, thank you. Stephanie Prentice there. Look at the latest sports news now with Andy Barwell.
Thank you. There'll be a new champion for the season-ending ATP Tour tennis finals in London, with Dominic Thiem facing Daniil Medvedev for the title. It follows defeats in the last four for both the world's top two players. Thiem defeated Novak Djokovic 7-5, 6-7, 7-6, and Medvedev later on defeated Rafa Nadal 3-6, 7-6, 6-3. And for Djokovic, it means no record equalling sixth title.
I mean, I have to put my heads down and say congratulations. I mean, that's all. I actually didn't play bad any point after 4-love. I thought I was every point I was in it. I did hit the ball. I was not pushing it, but he smashed it and he just played great.
Football now. Tottenham Hotspur outwitted Manchester City 2-0 to go to the top of the English Premier League table. But it's far too early for Jose Mourinho to want to talk about the title.
People cannot expect us to come here and after one season we are already fighting for the title. We are not fighting for the title. We are fighting to win every match. And Thursday we are going to fight to win the Europa League match. And we are going to lose matches.
Chelsea racked up 5 consecutive wins across all competitions with a 2-0 success away at Newcastle. A 2-1 success saw 10-man Brighton and Hove Albion win at Aston Villa for the first time. While Manchester United moved up into the top half of the table in the late kick-off, they had a first home league win of the season. They beat West Bromwich Albion 1-0 through a twice-taken Bruno Fernandes penalty.
I know what I have to do. I'm not happy for missing the first one. It's just the second penalty in the Liga. 3 points. Doesn't matter how we win. We are happy about the result. I think about the performance we need to do a little bit more.
In Spain, Atletico Madrid joined Real Sociedad level on points at the top of La Liga and with a game in hand. Atletico had a 1-0 win over Barcelona. Yannick Carrasco scored the only goal of the game. Villarreal dropped to third. They drew 1-1 at home to Real Madrid. Bayern Munich's lead in the Bundesliga is down to a point after a 1-1 draw at home to Werder Bremen. Erling Braut Haaland scored 4 times for Borussia Dortmund, who went second with a 5-2 victory at Hertha Berlin. Dortmund gave a senior debut to Yusufu Moukoko. 1 day after his 16th birthday, he becomes the youngest player ever to play a professional match in Germany. And in Italy's Serie A, a familiar name, Cristiano Ronaldo. He scored twice for Juventus, 2-0 winners over Cagliari. The champions up to second in the table, a point behind the leaders AC Milan.
Andy, thank you. Let's get some other stories now from our news desk with Fiona.
The coronavirus has dominated the online G20 summit meeting hosted by Saudi Arabia. The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called on the G20 countries to show commitment by funding the ACT Accelerator, a global collaboration to help the international community fight the pandemic.
A commitment by G20 leaders to invest substantially in the ACT Accelerator's immediate funding gap of $4.5 billion will immediately save lives. It will also lay the groundwork for mass provision of COVID-19 tools around the world and provide a way out of this global economic and human crisis.
Thousands of people in the Serbian capital Belgrade have been paying their respects to the head of the Serbian Orthodox Church, who died on Friday after contracting coronavirus. Patriarch Irene has been lying in state ahead of his funeral on Sunday. Many mourners appeared to ignore social distancing and mask-wearing guidelines. Some kissed the patriarch's glass casket. At one church event, worshippers drank from the same communion spoon. The opposition in Burkina Faso has alleged that preparations are underway for major fraud in Sunday's presidential election and has threatened not to recognise the results. Zéphirine Diabré, one of the main challengers to President Roch Kaboré, said governing party agents were paying women in markets to allow others to vote on their behalf. An official from Mr Kaboré's party dismissed the allegations. In France, a man has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for killing his wife and burning her body in a case that prosecutors described as an almost perfect domestic crime. In October 2017, Alexia Daval's partially burnt body was found in woodland near the northeastern town of Gray. Her husband, Jonathan Daval, appeared in tears at news conferences, saying she had gone jogging and never returned. He later confessed to beating her to death and to burning her body. Her death inspired a march of 10,000 people in the town, and women also honoured the jogger with symbolic runs in cities across France.
Fiona, thank you. Let's return now to the issue of how the US is handling the COVID pandemic. And there's been a mixed reaction to the announcement that the New York governor, Andrew Cuomo, is to be given a television award for his daily news conferences on the issue. He's due to receive an international Emmy during a ceremony on Monday. Here's Will Leonardo.
When they look back at this point in history, the decisions we make will determine how many people live and how many people die. And that is not being overly dramatic.
The straight-talking governor of New York will soon become an award-winning star of the screen. Andrew Cuomo's clinical presentation of data and forthright calls for residents to behave responsibly have stood in stark contrast to President Trump, with whom he's repeatedly clashed. The award organisers said he'd used TV masterfully to inform and calm people, replete with characters, plot lines and stories of adversity. But some, especially those who've doubted Mr Cuomo's COVID policies in New York, are sceptical. One fellow Democrat tweeted that the prize was fitting because he wasn't actually a competent, empathetic governor. He merely played one on TV.
Will Leonardo. Mistletoe is an ancient symbol of fertility in Europe, and in some parts of the world, sprigs of it are hung in a high place at Christmas so people can kiss each other underneath them. But now the UK's biggest auction of mistletoe, held in the English Midlands, has been cancelled for the first time in 160 years because of a lack of demand, and it's all down to COVID-19 restrictions, as Anna Owens reports.
253, that bow there.
The auction in Tenbury Wells was first held in 1860 and is aimed at retailers and florists who want to buy a van full of mistletoe rather than people who just want a few sprigs. Its success relies on the popular Christmas tradition of hanging the plant up and kissing anyone you happen to meet underneath it. Not exactly compatible with social distancing and a lack of festive parties. The auctioneer, Nick Champion, who's been running the sale since 1977, said he was sad to see it cancelled for the first time ever.
A lot of the mistletoe went into pubs and clubs and bars and whatever, and obviously they're not open and they're restricted if they do open again.
People can still buy mistletoe for their own homes, but for this year at least, it looks as though farmers who harvest the plant for auction will have to kiss goodbye to their seasonal sales.
Anna Owen, thanks for listening to The Newsroom. Our next edition is at 5 GMT.
This is the BBC World Service.
100 women.
I am Beatriz de la Pava, and I'll be bringing you a soundtrack of the fight for equality.
You don't own me.
It got picked up as an anthem for women, which makes me very proud.
Equal rights to have a job, to have respect, to not be viewed as a piece of meat.
I was looking for a song which really expressed this very positive sense of self.
Anytime a woman picks up a guitar and dares to go on stage, it's a radical act.
This is a problem of toxic masculinity and patriarchy all over the world.
Songs that inspired generations of women everywhere.
The measure of any society is how it treats its women and girls.
Rebel Girls soundtrack in half an hour.
I'm historian and writer David Olusoga, and after the news, I'll be in conversation with Barack Obama, the former US president. We'll be talking about his new book, A Promised Land, and reflecting on Obama's first term in office and its lasting impact. And in the aftermath of the 2020 election, we discuss Obama's relationship with President-elect Joe Biden, the Black Lives Matter movement, and an America deeply divided. That's a conversation with President Obama after the news.
BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. Donald Trump's legal team has announced it will appeal against the decision by a Pennsylvania judge to throw out a lawsuit aimed at blocking the state certification of its election result. In Wisconsin, election officials accused Trump supporters of deliberately slowing down the vote recount in a bid to prevent the state certifying its results by the 1st of December deadline, leaving the way open for Mr. Trump's campaign